In today's video, we'll explore the 5 most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded. From a man's fatal mistake inside a king cobra's cage, to a retiree's overconfident attempt to impress his grandchildren with a rattlesnake. But first, we begin in Indonesia, where a worker's walk home will become a terrifying struggle against a python. It was March 15, 2017, near Palu, central Sulawesi. The air was heavy with humidity, and the fading light gave the swampy lowlands a muted greenish haze. It was the kind of evening where the bush seemed still on the surface, yet alive with hidden movement. By nightfall, the shortcut Agus Hartono had taken hundreds of times would become the scene of an encounter few could survive. Agus, 49, had worked in palm oil plantations since his teens. He was known among his co-workers for moving quickly through tasks and avoiding unnecessary breaks. People said he disliked relying on others for rides, and often boasted that decades of outdoor work had made him unfazed by the wildlife. The shortcut home along a narrow drainage path saved him nearly 20 minutes, and he had walked it for years despite thick vegetation and poorly drained sections that could flood ankle deep in the rainy season. That day, he had stayed late to finish clearing a section of overgrowth. A co-worker offered him a lift back to the village, but Agus waved it off, saying the weather was clear. Villagers had spoken over the past week about a large snake sighted in the area. Some estimated it over 20 feet, but sightings were not unusual, and Agus dismissed them as exaggerated. His machete hung at his side, more a tool than a weapon in his mind. The drainage path was a narrow strip of firm ground bordered by stagnant water and stands of nipa palm. The air smelled of decaying vegetation, and the clouds of mosquitoes clung to the shade. On one side, brush leaned over the path in heavy clusters. On the other, the canal's surface was broken only by occasional ripples. Dusk blurred the edges of the water and ground, making it difficult to see where one ended and the other began. Reticulated pythons in this region can reach lengths of over 25 feet, weigh over 200 pounds, with girth as thick as a grown man's thigh. They ambush from cover, striking with surprising speed for their size. Once coiled, they tighten with each breath their prey exhales, collapsing the chest until air can no longer enter. Large individuals are capable of subduing animals heavier than the human, and in rare cases, they've been recorded attempting to consume people whole. 2 men walking parallel along a dirt road on the opposite side of the canal later said they heard a sharp splash, followed by a muffled yell. Looking toward the sound, they saw Agus stumble backward, his machete swinging in jerks. The python had come from the brush beside the canal, striking high and wrapping its body around his torso. Its tail coiled low around his legs, pulling him off balance. Agus tried to hack at the snake's body, but each swing was short and awkward. The coils locked tighter with each movement, compressing his ribs until his shouts turned into short, ragged gasps. One of the men ran down the embankment and grabbed the python's tail, attempting to pull it free, but the force of the snake's movements threw him sideways into the mud. The struggle lasted several minutes. Witnesses described the sound of Agus's breathing stopping abruptly, his head dropping forward. The python held its grip even after he went still, adjusting the coil slightly to maintain pressure. When villagers arrived in response to the shouting, they brought more machetes and began hacking at the thick, patterned body. The snake did not release him until its head and several feet of its neck were severed. When the coils loosened, the python's intention became clear. It had already begun to position Agus's head toward its mouth. Villagers pulled his body free before the swallowing attempt advanced. His face was smeared with mud, and his machete was still in his right hand. One man ran to the village to call for medical help, while others attempted chest compressions on the spot. Paramedics from the nearest clinic arrived nearly 30 minutes later, confirming he had no pulse. A brief autopsy performed the next day at the local health center reported multiple rib fractures, deep contusions around the chest and abdomen consistent with constriction, and signs of asphyxiation as the cause of death. Agus's funeral was held that afternoon in accordance with local Muslim customs, with the body washed, shrouded, and buried before sunset. Dozens of villagers attended, some still shaken by the attack, and prayers were offered for his family's safety. Local authorities documented the scene, measured the snake, and took statements from witnesses for their incident report. Wildlife officers disposed of the carcass and issued renewed warnings to plantation workers about avoiding isolated drainage paths after dusk. Agus's mistake served as a brutal reminder that these predators strike without warning. Meanwhile, in Thailand, a snake breeder's overconfidence with his most prized specimen would end in tragedy. It was June 21, 2015, in Nakhon Si Thammarat Province, Thailand. The air was thick from a storm that had rolled through an hour earlier, leaving puddles in the dirt and a faint smell of wet earth. The overcast sky dimmed the daylight, and in the low light of the snake shed, movements inside the cages seemed sharper, more deliberate. Somchai Phan, who had made a career out of handling dangerous reptiles, was about to break one of the first rules he used to teach beginners: never clean a venomous snake's enclosure without removing the animal. Somchai was 36, the son of a rice farmer who had turned his fascination with snakes into a livelihood. Over the past 12 years, he had supplied local reptile parks with cobras, vipers, and pythons, earning a reputation for being both skilled and fearless. He lived with his wife and young daughter in a small house behind his breeding facility. Though careful with most of his animals, he believed his 13-foot king cobra, raised from a hatchling, recognized him. It was his most prized specimen, and he often showed it off to friends, demonstrating what he called its calm nature. On that afternoon, he had invited 2 locals to see the snake. His assistant, familiar with its moods, advised against working inside the enclosure while the cobra remained in it. Somchai dismissed the concern, saying the storm's cooler air would make the animal sluggish. The cobra lay stretched along the far wall of its pen, its head elevated slightly, tongue flicking. Somchai entered with a bucket and a rag, intending to replace the water bowl and wipe down the floor. The shed was built from corrugated metal, the walls lined with wooden enclosures. Rain dripped steadily from the roof edges outside, and the air carried the damp organic smell of reptile bedding. The cobra's pen was 6 feet deep with a clear acrylic front panel, giving the friends a direct view of the animal's movements. The dim light made its scales glint a muted olive, broken by pale bands on its hood. King cobras, the largest venomous snakes in the world, can reach over 18 feet and weigh up to 20 pounds. They can deliver enough neurotoxic venom in a single bite to kill an elephant. Unlike many snakes, they'll hold their ground and can rear up to a third of their body length, striking from a distance that surprises even experienced handlers. Cooler temperatures often make them more alert rather than sluggish, and storms can heighten their defensive responses. The first warning came when the snake's head lifted higher, hood widening as Somchai reached toward the water bowl. His friends saw the body shift, muscles tightening in subtle waves. Somchai tapped lightly at the hood with the back of his hand, a demonstration he had done before. The cobra's strike was almost silent, a blur covering the 3-foot gap. Its fangs sank deep into his left forearm. Somchai jerked back, clutching his arm but laughing in what appeared to be bravado. He told the onlookers he knew how to handle a bite, even as 2 puncture wounds welled blood down his wrist. His assistant grabbed a cloth, tying it tightly above the elbow while attempting mouth suction, a method widely known to be ineffective. Within 90 seconds, Sumchai's voice thickened, and he swayed on his feet. His pupils narrowed, and his breathing grew shallow. The two friends helped lower him to the floor, his machete for cleaning still lying near the enclosure door. The cobra remained in the pen, hood still spread, watching the movement outside its glass front. Starting the 40-minute drive to the nearest hospital. 5 minutes into the trip, his limbs went limp and his breathing became faint, punctuated by brief gasps. The assistant attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while the truck sped along the narrow road. By the time they reached the hospital gates, Sumchai's chest had stopped moving. Medical staff attempted to ventilate him, but the neurotoxin had already paralyzed his respiratory muscles. He was pronounced dead within minutes of arrival. Back at the facility, authorities arrived to secure the cobra and other venomous snakes. The king cobra, still coiled in the same spot, was removed under strict containment protocols. The rest of the snakes were confiscated, citing improper safety measures and the risk to the surrounding community. Sumchai's funeral was held the next day in the village temple, attended by family, friends, and several local park operators who had worked with him over the years. His assistant spoke briefly about the dangers of overconfidence, noting that Sumchai had taught others to respect the unpredictability of snakes, but had forgotten that lesson himself in the moment. The incident prompted a short-lived discussion among local authorities about licensing and safety standards for private venomous snake keepers, though no formal changes were made. Yet, even as Sumchai's fatal overconfidence became a proof that serpents remain unpredictable regardless of years of handling, just over a year later in the Amazon, a fisherman's simple dare would bring him face to face with a green anaconda. It was October 4th, 2016, near Barcelos in the Brazilian state of the Amazonas. The river was calm under a heavy, humid sky, the water reflecting a dull green from the dense forest canopy. For those who knew its currents and depths, it was an ordinary day. For Joe Silva, the river he had worked on since boyhood would become the place he would not leave alive. Joe was 28, a fisherman like his father and grandfather. He was known among locals for his strong swimming and habit of entering the water even when others stayed ashore. He lived in a small wooden house near the docks with his wife and 2 children, and most of his income came from selling tuna carre and piranha to the market in Barcelos. Joe prided himself on being capable in the river, often telling others that the dangers were overstated, that people were too quick to let fear guide them. His work demanded long hours and constant adaptation to shifting river conditions, and in his mind, swimming was simply another skill he had mastered. This trip upriver had been routine, a 3-day run with 2 close friends, catching and cleaning fish to bring home before the next weather shift. That morning, they had filled the large cooler with their catch. While cleaning the fish at the muddy bank of a narrow channel, Joe had been teased for his reluctance to accept a dare from one of his friends: swim across the water and back. The channel wasn't wide, barely 30 yards. The channel itself was part of a floodplain network where large predators hunted. Green anacondas, the largest snakes in the Americas, can reach over 20 feet in length and weigh more than 200 pounds. They're ambush hunters, often lying motionless in shallow water, relying on camouflage to get close before striking. Their bite is used to secure prey before their coils constrict it. Attacks on humans are rare, but not unheard of in more remote stretches, especially during the dry season when prey grows scarce and water levels drop. forcing both fish and predators into tighter spaces. There had been warnings that week. Other fishermen mentioned seeing large ripples and brief flashes of dark scales in that channel. One man claimed a cow had gone missing near its banks just 2 weeks earlier. Joe had heard the talk but laughed it off, telling his friends he had swum there before without trouble. The dares at the cleaning site felt more like routine banter than a serious challenge. Without hesitation, he waded in, pushing through the surface vegetation until the muddy slope dropped away beneath his feet. The water was opaque, warm against his skin. He struck out with a strong breaststroke, keeping his head above the patches of floating grass. About halfway across, his right leg brushed something thick and unyielding. He kicked harder, assuming it was a submerged branch. The branch moved. In the next instant, something seized his upper arm with crushing force. His body jolted sideways, and he let out a sharp cry. From the bank, his friend saw a thick, dark body surge upward just enough for them to make out its size, thicker than a man's thigh. The snake's head broke the surface. Its jaws locked onto Joe's bicep. In the same motion, it wrapped its body around his torso, the coil sliding with a slow, purposeful grip. Joe's arms flailed above the water, then pressed desperately against the tightening loops. One of his friends grabbed a machete and ran into the water, shouting as he slashed toward the snake. But the anaconda began a slow roll, pulling Joe under. The rescuer got within a few feet, but couldn't see where to strike without risking hitting Joe. The water churned with bubbles and silt. Then, in a sudden lurch, both man and snake vanished beneath the surface. The rescuer surfaced seconds later, coughing and gasping, his hands empty. He waded back to the bank, scanning for movement, but the channel was calm again, only the floating vegetation shifting slightly as if settling back into place. They shouted for help from passing boats and used the radio to alert local authorities. It took 15 minutes of searching before Joe's body was found, floating near the opposite bank. His skin was mottled with deep bruises across his chest and abdomen where the coils had constricted. The upper arm bore 2 deep arcs of puncture wounds, matching the placement of the snake's fangs. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, his limbs limp in the current. They pulled him ashore in silence, laying him out on the muddy grass. The cooler of fish was left behind as the men wrapped Joe in the tarp and brought him back downriver. His funeral took place the next morning in a small riverside chapel, attended by family, neighbors, and fellow fishermen. His wife sat beside the casket, silent except when speaking to their children. Local authorities issued a reminder to avoid secluded channels during the low water months, citing reduced prey availability and increased predator activity. The advice echoed through the fishing community for a short time before fading back into the background of the many other risks the river always carried. Even though Joe's recklessness ended in the mercy of an anaconda, thousands of miles away in Florida, a retiree's stubbornness would bring him within striking distance of a venomous rattlesnake. It was July 29, 2018, near Ocala, Florida. The late summer heat sat heavy over the neighborhood, the air thick with humidity and the constant buzz of cicadas. In the quiet stretch of the afternoon, the stillness of a backyard chicken coop would be broken by a decision that, once made, could not be undone. Robert Miller was 61, a retired auto mechanic who had spent most of his life working in repair shops around Marion County. He was known among friends and neighbors for his stubborn self-reliance and habit of dealing with wildlife on his own terms. For years, he had caught non-venomous snakes barehanded, often showing them off to his grandchildren before letting them go. It was a mix of bravado and habit, something he had done since he was young, and something he believed showed his control over the hazards of rural life. That day, Robert had been tending his small backyard coop, a dozen chickens scratching through the dirt for feed. He took pride in the coop, repairing it himself after storms and keeping it free from predators when he could. Snakes were not unusual visitors, drawn by eggs and small chicks. He rarely saw them as a threat to himself, only to the birds. The idea of calling animal control for a snake in his own yard felt unnecessary to him, something a capable man shouldn't need. The yard was lined with wire fencing and shaded by a few drooping oaks. The air smelled faintly of feed and damp soil. Beyond the coop, the grass grew patchy and uneven, the ground dotted with tire ruts from an old riding mower. A porch ran along the side of Robert's house, where his neighbor, Mark, sat in a weathered chair 40 feet away. In the bright Florida sun, a movement near the coop's nesting box caught Robert's attention. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest rattlesnake species in North America, often exceeding 6 feet in length and weighing over 10 pounds. They carry potent hemotoxic venom capable of causing rapid tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and severe cardiovascular collapse. Though they typically avoid humans, they will stand their ground if threatened, relying on camouflage until cornered, then using their rattle as a final warning before striking. Mark saw the snake first and called out to Robert, telling him to use a stick or call for help. The diamond-shaped head and thick patterned body were unmistakable even from a distance. Robert brushed off the advice, stepping into the coop and positioning himself behind the reptile. The snake held still at first, relying on its coloration to blend against the dry grass and shadowed boards. Then, as Robert reached down, the rattle sounded, short, sharp bursts cutting through the humid air. Robert moved quickly, grabbing the snake just behind the head, his fingers clamping the thick neck. He lifted it up, turning toward the porch with a grin. The snake's body writhed violently, its coils twisting in the air, the heavy tail shaking. Mark shouted again for him to drop it, but Robert only adjusted his grip, shifting his weight slightly to keep balance on the uneven ground. The movement was small, almost invisible from the porch, but his grip slipped. The snake's neck flexed just long enough for its head to swing sideways. In one fast motion, the fang sank deep into Robert's left wrist, just above the joint. His hand jerked open and the snake fell, landing in the dust before sliding quickly toward the fence line. Robert stepped back but didn't retreat entirely, muttering that it wasn't serious. Mark saw the swelling begin within minutes. Robert's wrist reddened and puffed up, the skin stretched tight. He sat down heavily on the edge of the coop, breathing harder, his face damp with sweat. Mark called 911, keeping his eyes on Robert, who leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his shoulders rising and falling faster. By the time the paramedics arrived, 12 minutes later, Robert's skin had taken on a pale, clammy hue, and he was struggling to keep his head up. The paramedics worked quickly, loading him onto a stretcher and securing an oxygen mask. His blood pressure was already dangerously low, and his pulse was erratic. They began fluids and tried to keep him responsive, but his breathing slowed further on the short drive toward Ocala Regional Medical Center. Additionally, the bite struck a vein, accelerating the venom spread. He went into cardiac arrest before arrival and was pronounced dead minutes later. The county medical examiner noted 2 deep puncture wounds with surrounding tissue damage consistent with an eastern diamondback bite. The venom had caused rapid cardiovascular collapse, a severe reaction made worse by the location of the bite and the time to treatment. Robert's family was notified that evening, his wife and 2 daughters gathering quietly at the house. The funeral took place 3 days later, a small gathering under a canvas tent at the local cemetery. Only close relatives attended, along with a handful of neighbors. There were no speeches beyond a short prayer. County wildlife officers later issued a statement urging residents to avoid handling venomous snakes without proper equipment or training. Robert's overconfidence with a backyard rattlesnake proved fatal in Florida. Meanwhile, miles away in South Africa, a young field assistant would discover that professional training meant nothing when facing the lightning-fast strike of Africa's most feared serpent. It was September 18, 2014, in the rural farmlands of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The morning air was warm but not yet oppressive, and the sugarcane field stood tall and still under a pale sky. It was the kind of day where work moved steadily and without incident, until a moment of misjudgment changed its course. Thabo Ntembu was 34, a field assistant working for a regional herpetology research project that specialized in venomous snakes. He had been with the program for 4 years, valued for his knowledge of the land and his ability to navigate both farmland and the wild scrub beyond it. Thabo was not formally trained in science, but he was quick to learn, often trusted to assist with field measurements, GPS logging, and photographic records. He took pride in the role, seeing it as a bridge between his rural upbringing and formal research work. This trip had taken him and a senior researcher to a series of smallholder farms where sugarcane bordered patches of native grassland. They were documenting snake activity during the warmer months when sightings increased. Thabo's personal goal was to add to the project's growing library of photographs, images that help with identification and educational outreach. Though aware of the dangers, he believed that proximity and quick reflexes could make for better, clearer images, a mindset shaped by years of working close to animals. The dirt paths between the cane fields were narrow, hemmed in by walls of green stalks that rose over 8 feet high. Dry leaves littered the ground, rustling faintly in the light wind. Beyond the fields lay patches of bush where thorn trees cast narrow shadows. The stillness of the morning was broken only by the hum of insects and the occasional call of birds overhead. Visibility was limited. Anything moving at ground level could vanish into cover within seconds. Black mambas are among the quickest and most dangerous snakes in the world, capable of reaching speeds over 12 miles per hour in short bursts. They can grow longer than 14 feet and are known for their potent neurotoxic venom, which can cause respiratory failure within hours if untreated. While generally avoiding human contact, they can become highly defensive when threatened, raising the front third of their bodies and delivering multiple rapid strikes. Their warning, an open black mouth, is as distinctive as it is brief. Earlier that week, local farmers had mentioned mamba sightings near the outer cane rows, warning the researchers to keep to the central paths and avoid dense grass. That morning, the senior researcher reminded Thabo to maintain distance and not to block a snake's path, as most would retreat if given space. These words came back only minutes before the encounter. While crossing a narrow track, the 2 men saw movement ahead, a large dark shape gliding from one side of the path to the other. Thabo was holding the camera. The mamba's size and visibility against the pale dirt was exactly the sort of image he wanted. Ignoring the instruction to hold back, he stepped forward, angling himself so the snake would have to pause before entering the far grass. The senior researcher called for him to stop, but Thabo was already crouching slightly, lifting the camera to his eye. The mamba reacted instantly. It turned toward him, the front third of its body rising until its head was level with its waist. The mouth opened wide, showing the black interior. Then it struck, 2 rapid bites to his lower torso, followed by a third to the upper thigh. The entire attack lasted less than 2 seconds. The snake then dropped back to the ground and slid into the grass, disappearing almost as quickly as it had appeared. Thabo stepped backward, dropping the camera to hang from its strap. His left hand went to his side, where the fabric of his shirt was already marked by 2 small punctures. The senior researcher reached him in seconds, guiding him down to sit and pulling out the bandage for pressure immobilization. He radioed for their driver, who was stationed a quarter-mile away, and began wrapping Thabo's leg as well. Within minutes, Thabo's speech slurred, and his eyelids grew heavy. His breathing became shallow, and he struggled to keep his head upright. They carried him to the vehicle and laid him in the back seat. On the dirt road toward the highway, the senior researcher monitored his pulse, which was rapid but weakening. By the time they reached the main road, Thabo had lost consciousness. The clinic in the nearest town was 12 miles away, but the vehicle was still 3 miles short when his breathing stopped. CPR was attempted while continuing the drive, but there was no response. At the clinic, he was pronounced dead on arrival. The estimated time from bite to death was under 40 minutes. His funeral was held in his home village 3 days later. Fellow researchers attended, standing alongside family and friends in a small outdoor service. The coffin was simple, carried by relatives from the church to the burial site. The project director later spoke privately with the family, expressing that Thabo's contributions to the research were valued and that his death underscored the risks inherent in the work. Within a week, local environmental authorities installed signs at key points along the sugarcane fields warning of mamba crossings. Farmers adjusted their harvest schedules to avoid certain times of day, when snake activity was highest. Thanks for watching. If these encounters with lethal and swift predators entertained you, click here for more.